He has insulted his hosts, criticised his allies and told lies. Now the US President Donald Trump will wrap up his turbulent European tour with a meeting with Russia's President Putin. It all began last week in Brussels at a NATO summit where he demanded that members start paying their fair share. Will Mr. Trump's blunt rhetoric weaken the bond or create perhaps a stronger, more efficient alliance? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. Well, look, he isn't the first US president to talk tough about NATO, to NATO. In fact, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, well, they were frustrated too by the financial burden that America's had to shoulder. What actually were Mr. Trump's concerns? Will he actually succeed in changing NATO policy?
It's an alliance that spans continents and backs up nations too small to fight their own battles. But US President Trump has been questioning the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's value for money. A recent summit has put old issues under new scrutiny. In the era of Trump, can the gatekeeper for international peace hold it together? Last week, President Trump was in Brussels for the NATO summit, where he went in all guns blazing.
I'll see NATO and I'm going to tell NATO, you got to start paying your bills. The United States is not going to take care of everything.
It prompted the EU to suggest that he use a more diplomatic tone.
Dear America, appreciate your allies. After all, you don't have that many.
But the president kicked things off by claiming Germany is being held captive by Russia over a gas pipeline deal that has been struck between the two nations. It would leave Europe heavily reliant on Russian gas.
I don't know what you can do about it now, but it certainly doesn't seem to make sense that they pay billions of dollars to Russia and now we have to defend them against Russia.
It's a concern shared by Nordic nations who see the move as a threat to Europe's overall energy security and stability. The president also took NATO allies to task over failing to meet military spending targets, which are set at 2% of GDP by 2024. So far, 5 of the 29 member nations have reached the target. Trump has demanded a doubling of efforts to 4% of GDP. But defence spending has been on the up since 2015, and NATO allies are sticking to the original plan, agreed long before Trump took to the White House. He may be blunt, but Trump is not the first US president to criticise NATO. Both Barack Obama and George W. Bush voiced frustrations about burden sharing during their time in the Oval Office. NATO estimates that altogether, its members spent $918.3 billion on military defence in 2016. The lion's share of it, 70%, coming from the United States. But modern warfare's new challenges have left the old NATO, one that poured money into military hardware, at risk of becoming obsolete. As the US pivots to face rising powers in Asia and growing threats in the Middle East, European security is no longer a priority. For Trump, for now, it's on to the Kremlin, perhaps to strengthen new bonds and to forge new alliances. America is calling for greater efficiency from NATO, and broadly its allies agree. In an era of shifting geopolitical realities and ever-evolving security threats, will an outspoken American president force the transnational alliance to get its act together?
Well, joining us on Roundtable from Prague, first of all, we have Martin Michelot, the Deputy Director of the EUROPEUM Institute for European Policy, specialising in transatlantic security and NATO policy. With me at the Roundtable, we have Ulrike Esther Franke from the European Council on Foreign Relations, concerned that Trump is undermining the transatlantic relationship. Also here in the studio, we welcome Sarah Elliot, Chair of Republican Overseas UK, who agrees with Trump that NATO members should increase their spending. Ulrike, let me come to you first. You were at a meeting last week that ran alongside the summit in Brussels. It was called NATO Engages, and where an awful lot of people from the summit meeting would come down and tell you what they thought should happen, what had happened, etc., etc. You said there was panic at times.
Yeah, there was certainly a moment of panic on the second day. The second day was when all of a sudden we heard that Donald Trump may have been threatening to pull the United States out of NATO. It wasn't exactly sure what exactly he said. He said something like the US may go at it alone, I think. And so there were 30 minutes of absolute panic that the US may withdraw from NATO if the allies weren't to spend the 2% of their GDP on their defenses by 2019, which is much earlier than the agreed upon date. But then 30 minutes later, about 30 minutes later, Donald Trump gave a press conference where he said basically the exact opposite, saying that this was a great NATO meeting and that, you know, the alliance was stronger than it was 2 days earlier.
Martin, do you think it's any stronger, considering what he did and how he said it?
Well, I would not venture to say that today, unfortunately, because or thanks to the actions of President Trump, that the alliance is stronger. If anything, what was agreed upon in Brussels is what was pre-agreed upon by the ministers of defense and the ministers of foreign affairs. So on this very specific strand, on the strand of deterrence towards Russia, on the strand of what the EU and NATO will cooperate on the strand of what NATO will do on counterterrorism, the alliance is stronger. But what Donald Trump has done is actually to undermine the trust between the allies by adding this factor of unpredictability, of knowing that at any time he could have a different idea in mind that his advisors and that his allies are not aware of, and he could eventually be turning the tables. And when you are in a political military alliance such as NATO, you need that predictability.
We'll get into some of the spending issues in just a moment, but Sarah, let me throw that one at you. It was mentioned by the reporter in the package, and Donald Trump too. Martin's mentioned it. You have friends in NATO. Donald Tusk said, appreciate your allies. After all, you don't have that many. I mean, that's a fair point, isn't it? He's alienating an awful lot of people.
Well, I think what he's doing is actually just pointing out an uncomfortable truth to the NATO allies, that they're not living up to their agreement. They are not spending 2% of GDP on defense spending, and yet at the same time, Germany is going into business with Russia, who we're supposed to put our necks on the line to defend them against. So I just think Donald Trump is here to be a disruptor. He's here to defend the American taxpayer and the Americans. And listen, if you listen to his Secretary of Defense, if you listen to his UN ambassador, America is going to live up to its commitment to Article 5. And we are committed to doing that. The Vice President has also said that. And also the President has said that.
Article 5 is the one where you defend
Yes.
a country that has been attacked.
That's correct.
How many times in NATO's history do you think that Article 5 has been invoked?
I don't know precisely.
Well, I can tell you, once. And who was the country that had been attacked?
You're going to have to tell me.
The United States. September the 11th, 2001. So when he says we're defending everybody else, actually the only time it's been used is to defend the United States with actions in Afghanistan and later on Iraq. I mean, it's not true that the United States is defending everybody else.
Well, we are arming the Ukrainians. We do have our troops spread throughout Europe and on the borders of Russia, especially in Poland. I mean, we are committed to it. And we have been since the end of the Second World War. I don't think that there's definitely a stomach by the American people to keep this going. We see the value of it. It's very popular.
Yeah. He said 70%, 70 to 90% of the spending at NATO comes from the United States. That isn't true. 70% of the total budget of all of the countries of NATO comes from the United States, but the United States doesn't spend it all on NATO. It's unquantifiable. The United States is spending matters on defense in South China Seas, in the Far East.
But we're spending it, we're meeting our 2%.
Thought to be around about 22% of NATO's total spending comes from the United States, not 70%. He's telling lies, isn't he?
But he is not telling a lie that the other countries are not living up to their commitments.
Well, he said 4.2% of US GDP. Actually, it's 2.8 by 2024.
You know, he likes to make a deal. And so what he does is he pushes the ship far out, and then he's, you know, in a negotiation, you go further in the beginning, and then you crawl back. And I think that's what he's doing. He's making a deal.
Okay. Do jump in, any one of you, any time.
On the 2%, just because we keep hearing this, the allies aren't living up to their commitments, which isn't exactly true, because what was decided in 2014 at the Wales Summit was that NATO allies would try to go towards the 2% by 2024. Yeah. So this whole narrative about the allies not spending 2% now, I mean, that can be seen as a problem, and I would like the European allies to spend more, but it is simply not true that they're not living up to their commitment, because the commitment is by 2024. Currently, as Stoltenberg has pointed out, 24 of the 29 member states are likely to meet that 2% GDP spending commitment by 2024. It's not the 29, and that is a problem. I'm happy to talk about this, but it's there are no dues to be paid. That's one thing.
Well, there are no dues to be paid because it is not a club into which you throw all your money. You have your defence spending, and then you use it as you wish. And he's talking about 2% of GDP on defence.
Yeah, which of course isn't paid to NATO, because that would make NATO the most, the biggest military.
The only money paid directly to NATO is like admin fees.
But don't you see a conflict of interest here when the American people are willing to put their neck on the line for Germany and other NATO countries, but particularly Germany, and yet they're going into business with Russia, and who is the protagonist in this situation. So spending billions of dollars on energy.
We're not at war with Russia.
No, but the NATO is there.
Product from Russia.
NATO is there to protect these countries from an aggressive Russia in particular. And yet they're going into business building an energy pipeline with them directly.
Well, we'll throw that one to Martin. Jump in on that.
Interestingly, there is quite a strong dissension within the alliance itself, especially coming from Central and Eastern European countries, about the so-called pipeline, Nord Stream 2, the deal between Russia and Germany. So, you know, it is certainly problematic. The leaders in the region are quite concerned about how this, can keep Russia in the game, also economically and financially. But what this so-called deal is emblematic of is the fact that Trump is breaking one of the lines of NATO that existed in the past, which is not to conflate defense spending and with trade policy. And these are two issues that are completely separate and that should not go into any sort of discussion about Article 5. Article 5 is there to defend one country if it is attacked. And in the near future, this could be the case of Estonia, or this could be the case of any other NATO ally. But the danger is when we stop talking about defense issues narrowly understood for what all that they mean and start going into trade issues. And, it's not just the energy pipeline. It's also the fact that now we have a president who is openly saying that, he wants countries to spend more money because they benefited from the American security umbrella. They benefited from America spending the money, to put it simply, in order to enrich themselves. And he finds that to be unfair. So he's really upending the understanding of European security as we know it. And that understandably has created a certain amount of nervousness in the heads of state of countries who feel that they are under threat from Russia.
Do respond to that, Sarah. And I think I need to give you the opportunity to do so at this point. Then I want to bring up something that a retired US general has said.
So what I would say to that is energy is very closely related to security and one's defenses. So I think on energy policy, I think that's a valid complaint by the Americans to say, well, listen, if we were to go to war with Russia, you're in a really tricky position, Germany. And we'd have to defend you. And where would your alliances be? Would your alliances be to us or to an energy agreement with Russia? And secondly, you've got to remember that Donald Trump was elected by the American people to defend the American interests in terms of their, how the government spends their money and also puts their neck on the line in international conflict. So I think he is here to reevaluate all relationships, that's including NATO, to just reevaluate, take a step back and say, well, is this really in the best interest of my electorate?
Could I quickly come in on Germany?
Yeah, because then I want to bring in this American general.
Yes, because I'm German originally, and I don't want to leave it, like that, because we shouldn't forget that Germany was in fact one of the biggest advocates when it came to sanctioning Russia. So the fact that we get some small part of our energy from Russia so far hasn't certainly meant that Germany is being controlled by Russia, as the president has suggested that. So that is simply not true. And again, the numbers are completely skewed. Germany gets some 20+% of its total energy from Russia, nowhere near the 70%.
But it could increase. It could increase.
It's not.
Okay. We're talking the points have been made. Let me bring in General Ben Hodges. He was Commanding General of NATO's Allied Land Command 2012 to 14, Commanding General of US Army Europe November 2014 until 2017, December, so the end of last year. He knows what he's talking about when it comes to military work in the European continent. He said, the President publicly humiliated our most important allies, and then the following day said everything was great. The mood around Brussels a mix of concern, worry, frustration, anger and resentment. Either way, this is in the worst interests of the United States, the best interests of the President of Russia. Now, when somebody as senior as and experienced as that says something like that about his commander-in-chief, if he happened to still be in the forces, we should worry, shouldn't we?
I mean, this is the thing about, I think everyone has to take a deep breath and a step back as it relates to Donald Trump and his rhetoric, because I think you have to understand the role that he's playing in the big picture, and that is just to reevaluate things in Americans' interest. I think that his words and also the support of his staff, the Secretary of Defense, the UN ambassador, his national security
Sarah, let's not forget that the Pentagon immediately wrote back on what he had said and actually sort of said he didn't mean a single thing.
Yeah.
But that's all very well knowing it's bluster when it's a 5-year-old in the school playground. But when it's the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, isn't it a cause for concern?
He's been president for 18 months. He's been in office for 18 months.
Seems like years.
So we just have to understand how this man operates. You just got to understand the character in which you're dealing with. But I can tell you, the United States military
Stable genius or
has, well,
neither?
according to him.
Well, I mean, he sounds a bit unstable if he's saying stuff he doesn't really believe, and he's upsetting his most allies.
Doing this. He's speaking to his base. The stability is with the Secretary of Defense and with his cabinet and the UN, his national security advisors and the UN ambassador. I'm telling you, we are all committed to keeping NATO. And actually, the President has said, I know that the media picks up on the really big bullet points here, but he has said that we are committed to upholding Article 5.
So why does General Hodges say it's in the worst interest of the United States, the best interests of Russia?
I just think a lot of people don't like working with the President, and they don't like his rhetoric, and that's what they're coming out against.
I think he's making this argument because what President Trump has been doing relatively consistently is undermining the international system that the US has helped build. And I would very much make the same argument in saying undermining the system from which the United States has benefited so enormously is not in the US interest. I mean, many things that Donald Trump has proposed, in my view, are very much against the interest of the United States, such as, for instance, withdrawing so many troops from Europe, or Germany in particular, because they are not, in fact, there primarily to guarantee German or European security. They are there because Germany and Europe is the staging ground for US military operations in the Middle East and Africa. So withdrawing that would hurt the United States at least as much, if not more, than Germany. And there are many such points. So all of this, I understand the America First rhetoric and saying, you know, I'm there to make the argument for the American people. I'm just not convinced that what he does internationally is actually good for the American people.
Martin, I saw you nodding, so you wanted to jump in.
A quick word on Article 5. I mean, and you know, the defensibility. I think we have to understand that what NATO is very strong on right now, today, since 2014, is deterrence towards Russia. And as a matter of fact, despite all the rhetoric, the communique, the 79-point communique, the NATO summit reinforces NATO's deterrence towards Russia. But the idea is more between the lines. The weakness is now more between the lines. It's the idea that there may not be that collective resolve to protect a Baltic state if a situation were to develop, and the idea that the U.S. may not stand squarely behind it.
And this is where General Hodges perhaps gets it right, Sarah, because what he's suggesting is that it might embolden Russia if he thinks there are some cracks in the alliance.
Well, I think that's why there's a meeting today between Putin and President Trump. And I think President Trump is going to be the alpha male facing another alpha male, staring him in the eyes and saying no.
Ever seen that come out well?
I think it'll be very interesting. I think it's going to be predictably unpredictable. But at the end of the day, President Trump is there to say, listen, I just met with my gang of fighters, NATO, and we are prepared to do this, this, that, and the other if you don't stop your actions.
Or he could say, well, you can have Crimea.
Yeah.
As long as we ask you to stop interfering in Iraq, in Syria.
He has been, I mean, if you go back to last year when he spoke in Poland, he spoke very eloquently about Western civilization, protecting Europe, being very proud of the Polish people for the way they have defended themselves against Russians in the past. Listen, I believe that is where the president's heart is, as well as his advisors, who I have known and followed for many years. And that they are not a pro-Russia bunch.
So what about the statement that Crimea may be Russian after all because people there speak Russian? I mean, it's exactly these kind of statements that have created these worries. And in Brussels, the worry was very much about this summit, that he may give away Crimea, sounds a bit, but that he may say that, okay, actually we accept that Crimea is now Russian and things like that. What about this?
I respect the fact that on the surface it doesn't look well for our allies. And I think this is where relationships of the people who are on the ground and working on this on a day-to-day basis for the president carry a lot of weight. And you also have to put in perspective the role in which he's playing for his electorate and the American people. I mean, he is he has proven to be an expert politician for a non-politician. And so I guess my words of advice as an American to my European friends is try to see what he is doing politically back home.
Okay, can I just bring this in? I'm going to introduce a new word. Perhaps to you, it certainly was to me, but certainly to Roundtable. It's called pronoid. Okay, and this is John Cleese, Monty Python's John Cleese, writing seriously this week. My American friends are asking me about Trump's observation that the British, quote, like him. I regret this is quite unfounded. It is pronoid, which is the opposite of paranoid. A paranoid person thinks everybody's out to get them. A pronoid person is somebody who thinks without any basis in reality that everybody likes him. And I mean, that's a dangerous demand to have in charge, isn't it?
Well, not according to the American people who voted for him. I mean, on the other hand, it could give you a lot of confidence, couldn't it? And courage to just go out there and get things done.
What, to say what you like, insult everybody else and still think they like you? I mean, that's lunacy.
He's not trying to be Times Man of the Year. He's not trying to be Mr. Popular. He is trying to defend America's interests. And I know that rubs hard against our traditional allies. I do get that. But at the same time, listen, his father was born in Germany, I believe. His grandfather, his mother was Scottish. I mean, he has lots of ties to Europe. His former wife is Czechoslovakian. I mean, I do not think that he has like a hatred or anything against our traditional allies. I think honestly, he's just trying to be a disruptor, to reevaluate.
Or does he really think everybody likes him? Is he pronoid?
Well, not after the protest we've seen in London and Scotland.
He said he waved at them from the golf course. He said that was great, great.
I certainly can't tell you what Donald Trump believes. I would never try to venture there. I'm not sure whether Sarah would like to do that, but I'm not going there.
Martin.
Well, if he's pronoid, it's good for him. I'm happy that he has a positive outlook on certain things. I do, however, wish that outlook actually reflected itself in his vision of the world, because his vision of the world is more of a zero-sum vision, in which, whatever is a gain for Germany is in his mind immediately a loss for the United States. And this is exactly what Ulrike was saying, upends a certain fundamental basis of the liberal order, and which creates a certain amount of nervousness.
And that nervousness, does that preface the beginning of the end for NATO and organizations like it?
It certainly does not. If anything, you see one of the most important leaders of Europe, President Emmanuel Macron of France, every time there is this, very strong rhetoric coming from the United States, his main reflex is to talk about the reinforcement of the European pillar of NATO and to talk about European strategic autonomy, which is the idea that Europeans could ensure their own security without relying partially or entirely on the US.
Is that possible? Could Europe go it alone?
there's a real danger of it drifting apart within NATO. And that's why I personally found this summit so frustrating, because I actually would have liked to talk about burden sharing within NATO, but not on the ground of this 2%, which has become a bit of a fetish, but about actual contributions and you know, what the allies actually should be able to do and at what point. And we didn't really get to that.
I think it's going to strengthen NATO because Donald Trump has put forward the elephant in the room, which is Germany's ever closer economic ties with Russia, which is a danger to the NATO alliance, and also it puts them in a very tricky position.
Do you think he understands that an awful lot of people in Europe are rather wary about strengthening Germany militarily, for whatever reason?
Yes, but that's within the NATO alliance, strengthening Germany.
Okay.
I can tell you that from the perspective of Paris, from the perspective of Prague, Germany is seen as a force multiplier rather than a threat.
Yeah.
And there is a certain amount of ease with Berlin playing a stronger role. And I'm talking about ease, but it could actually even be desire to see Germany play a stronger role in European security.
Martin, thank you very much indeed. Ulrike, thanks to you. Sarah, I know you've been everywhere, more than once this last week, defending, as chairman of Republicans Overseas UK, defending the President of the United States. We thank you for taking the time to come on to this and reminding us that President Trump's mother is Scottish. So was mine. But there, I think well, I hope at least there the similarity ends. From all of my guests, from you watching, thank you very much indeed. From me, David Foster, and the team, goodbye for now. See you next time.